Wow, I am so very excited to be here in Denmark. Like it was so easy, no flights, no waiting at the airport, no traveling to the airport. Basically, I was sharing with a couple of friends, like from the Wizard of Oz. I had the ruby red slippers, and I put my heels together, and there I am in Denmark. So thank you so much, my friends. Lars, thank you for thinking about me. And I want to say hello to all my friends who I haven't seen in the past 2 years, but we stayed connected through Facebook. And I want to congratulate Evan and Christina on their baby girl, who I'm so excited about. Wow. As difficult as life is right now, the new normal, the fears, the paranoia, the having to be so cautious and having not really have the freedom to do what we choose to do on a daily basis, it's still beyond my wildest dreams. Like endless possibilities ahead. And it wasn't always like that for me. I I think I'll start a little bit in the beginning. I come from a working class home, and my family was Jewish, and we did not ever have everything we wanted, but we basically had everything we needed. My parents knew when to say no to me, and I never liked that from the time I was a child. I remember starting shoplifting to get what I wanted in the big department stores as a young kid, and I never really liked the word no. But I was a shy child. I was a quiet kid. I was a good student. I did what I was supposed to do pretty much. And I really didn't get crazy until I was a teenager. I kind of broke out of my shell as a teenager, and I found what I thought was the solution to my problems because kids used to bully me and they used to pick on me and they used to make me cry and I was intimidated and I didn't want to be like that. I wanted to be like a leader instead of a follower, and I wanted to, all those cute slogans that we used to use out there. I wanted to party hardy and, live life to the fullest and all that stuff. And hi, Johnny. I was afraid of everything. So the first time I got turned on to a drug was pot, with marijuana, and I loved the way it made me feel when I wasn't afraid anymore. I just wasn't. I just started doing things that were totally out of my comfort zone. The next drug of choice I was introduced to was actually beer, and I hated the way it tasted. I didn't like the way it felt going down, but I liked what it did to me. And I became like courageous and fun, and I had friends, and I got to do things that I never thought I would ever have the nerve to do. And you couldn't make me cry anymore. The reality is, it was probably a good, I don't know, 15 years when I didn't cry because I wasn't feeling. I was numb. And I wasn't afraid of anything because towards the end, I really wasn't afraid of dying. I just living for today to get more of every day, waking up to get more. But it wasn't like that in the beginning. So I can tell you that I definitely crossed that invisible line sometime in probably around the time I was 20 or 21. I mean, I was using from about 16, 17, but I crossed that invisible line and I started getting repercussions. I started losing jobs. I was, just barely made it through college. Somehow I graduated with honors because I cheated my way through. And I was very promiscuous in college, and I was counting my like accomplishments by like how many men I was sleeping with, which was like a crazy weight to judge how well you were doing. And I thought I was really getting over. And I had met a man in college, and he fell in love with me. And I don't know that I fell in love with him, but I know that I really wanted to get out of my parents' home because it was restricting my using. So I kind of talked myself into being in love with him. We got married. We were married for 10 years. It was really a very difficult, painful 10 years. I never thought there was any other option for me because I never knew anyone who my family didn't really believe in divorces. And I was really comfortable in the uncomfortable. Comfortable. If that makes sense to anybody? Like, I just would go on doing what I did, and I was a workaholic. I'd go to work every day, and at the end of the day, I would cop. And if, as long as I came home with drugs, everything was peaceful at home. And for many years, we just fought a lot. And one day I had a friend say to me, like, if you're so miserable, why don't you just leave him? And I thought, leave him. I never even occurred to me to leave him. And I didn't really know how. My parents had tried trying to convince us to go for marriage counseling for years. They were going to pay for it, and he never wanted to go. And one day after work, I went to cop, and my cop man wasn't there, and there was a bar on the street. It was on a very well-known street in Manhattan called 34th Street, right across from a big venue called Madison Square Garden. There was a bar there. I saw a sign in the window that said happy hour, one free drinks. I only had a few bucks in my pocket because I still had some credit with the cop man. And I went in with only those few bucks, and the bartender kept scratching off this little card for me, and I kept winning free drinks. And I was very happy. And he said, "Give me a minute." He walked down the other end of the bar. There was a redheaded bartender there, and he said to him, "I've just met the woman of your dreams." He really didn't know I was the woman of his nightmare. And he brought the other bartender down to the end of the bar. My husband today, Bobby, he's on the screen here. It says Susan M because he doesn't know how to change the name. And I wanted to introduce him to all my friends from Denmark. Um, and it was love or lust at first sight. Um, we I went home and I told, and a few days later, and I told my husband I was leaving him. A few days. Like I knew him a few days. And he said, "No, let's go for marriage counseling." I said, "It's too late now." And I moved out. So Bobby and I were together a week. A week. I don't suggest this for anybody. When he asked me to move in with him, and me being like a good Jewish old-fashioned girl, very very good values and ethics. Yeah, I should have had them, but I didn't. I was taught them. I said, "Well, I'll only move in with you if you'll marry me." And he said, "Okay, if we're still together in a year, I'll marry you." Because I was still married to my first husband. And reality was, eventually, we just used together. He carried me home many times. I carried him home many times. We were both blacked out. I don't know how we got home. And this went on for a couple of years. I had found crack in the interim. Brought me even quicker down the tubes. It's a fast way to hit a bottom, and that's what it did for me. And at that point, I woke up one morning and my body had changed. Like a woman knows these things. Like I knew right away that I must be pregnant. Like I had grown breasts, which I never had. I just knew right away. And I knew better, and I couldn't stop using. And I knew better, and I just couldn't stop using. That's where my addiction had taken me. I'm smoking crack every day. I'm ripping and running. I'm doing anything I had to get more. And here I have a baby growing in my belly, and I can't stop using. And my intention was really at that point not to keep the pregnancy. I had never wanted to be a parent because I never wanted the responsibility. But one day, some nice good Samaritan on the street actually paid for me to get a sonogram, and I had no prenatal care. And when I went for that sonogram, the woman said, "If you're going to think of not keeping this baby, don't look at the screen." Well, I looked at the screen, and that all bets were off. I knew I had to do something. I wanted this baby. So shortly thereafter, my family discovered what a mess I was, and they tried to get me help. My sister, who lives in Hong Kong, flew in from Hong Kong to try to get me into treatment. This is back in 1988. She had me on waiting lists for various treatment facilities. I had to call them every day. I had to go for interviews. Half the time I didn't show up when I told her I would because I'd be outside begging for money. I was in the streets and in the subways in New York begging for money. By this time I had no other resources but what I got every day. And the more pregnant I got, the more people felt sorry for me and gave me money. And my sister finally found a couple of places that I called, and they had me calling them every day. And she finally went back to Hong Kong without any results, without me getting into treatment. And the last time I called, and I saved a quarter. It was a quarter from payphones back then. Those of you who are millennials probably don't even know what a payphone is. You used to have them in the streets where you put money in, you dial a number, and that's the only way people could find each other. We didn't have cell phones. And when I called that day, they told me they didn't have a bed for a substituting woman. There was no bed for me. No, substituting pregnant woman. It was not happening. And I really went on an even worse run. And one day I was stuck. I was in the middle of it was the middle of the night. I was stopping cars at red lights for money, for drugs, and I stopped this one particular car. And this man, he was actually a good Samaritan, had no agenda. I had, mind you, I had never heard of Narcotics Anonymous. I never knew anyone who ever got clean. The only thing I ever knew is when people went away to detox, and they came out a week or 2 weeks later and they had two checks from the government instead of one, and they had gained 10 pounds and we used together. And that's all I ever knew. So this one man, he said he would take me for a meal, but he wouldn't give me money. And I trusted him. I looked in his eyes and I trusted him. And I went for that meal with him. And for the first time ever, I said the words, I have a problem. I can't stop using. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid. I'm going to have a baby soon, and I just don't know. I was terrified. And he gave me his phone number. He said if I wanted help, I could come and live in his home. A guy I met on the street with no agenda. I could come and live in his home, and he would help me get clean. 2 days later, the pain was great enough that I made that phone call. On the way to his house, of course, on the train, I used whatever I could scrape up, and he took me into his home. And a few days later, he took me to my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. He knew nothing about addiction. He didn't know the danger I was to him in his home. I could rob, steal, cheat, God knows what I could do in his home. He let me into his home. And for some bizarre reason, I didn't lie, I didn't steal, I didn't cheat in his home. I, I don't know why. So I went to that very first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. His roommate was actually one of us. He had dipped and dabbed for years, tried to get clean, and he knew all about addiction. And he knew how dangerous I could be to them, and he wanted me out of their house. Took me to my first meeting. I heard a woman sharing about putting herself at risk sexually, which I knew I had done, and she had gone for an HIV test, and she was waiting for the results. And she shared this in front of a room full of people. And I thought, oh my God, how brave. How brave. These people are so brave. Like, not only that she did this and went for the test and was going to go back for the results, but she could share this with people she never knew, she didn't know. She probably knew a bunch of them, but she didn't know me. And I'm sure she didn't know other people. And the women welcomed me and they embraced me, and I smelled and I was dirty, and they just took me into their arms and they gave me their phone numbers and they told me to keep coming back. And that was my first experience with Narcotics Anonymous. It turned out that the day I stopped using was exactly 30 days before the day my daughter was born. I had no idea how pregnant I was. I did not know I was going into my ninth month of pregnancy. Um, I don't know how I stayed clean those last 30 days. I know that Marty, who was the one who knew exactly how dangerous I could be, he tried calling my parents to see if they would take me in. And he says, you got to come and get her. And they had found a recovery program for family members of addicts. And the recovery program had told them not to enable me and not to take me in and to let me hit my own bottom. And as heartbreaking as it was for my parents, they were taking that advice. So I had nowhere to go. So he then got on the phone. We called him Jewish Boy with Telephone because he could convince anyone of anything on the phone. And he found a private shelter in the Bronx that was willing to take in a substance using pregnant woman. They never took, they did not normally accept pregnant women, and they just never accepted newborns. But for some reason, he convinced them. And when they met me, they agreed. And I went into his shelter in the Bronx before I had my baby, and I started making meetings in the Bronx, um, as many as I could get to, without breaking the curfew there, because I knew I had nowhere to go. I knew if they threw me out, I had nowhere to go. And 30 days later, I went into labor, and those two men were there with me, picked me up, took me to the hospital. It was Michael Bear and it was Marty, and I could say their names because they were not recovering addicts, and they're both no longer with us. They both died clean, and my daughter was born, and they called my parents to come and see me in the hospital and meet the baby, and my parents were terrified to come and meet the baby because they were just sure that there was no way I could care for a baby. I couldn't care for myself. How could I possibly be a mom to this little beautiful little girl? And they did eventually come, and of course they fell in love, and I named her Tara Miracle because she was the miracle that got me clean. Because without her, I don't believe I'd ever been here. I don't think I'd ever made it to the rooms in Narcotics Anonymous. I had no reason to live. I didn't care enough about my own life. I put myself in situations every day where I could have been killed. And I didn't care. And I never cried and I wasn't afraid. And now I had a newborn baby to take care of. And by some miracle of God, I call it a God incident because I don't believe in coincidences. There was a mistake at the hospital, and they missed the positive toxicology because my daughter, although I was clean 30 days, she still was positive, had positive for cocaine in her urine. And they sent her home with me to this private shelter. And it was a mistake. The mistake that probably was the reason I'm still here today. Because like I said, I don't know if I could have done it if I got sent home without her. And I got a phone call that if I didn't get into a treatment program, they were going to come and take the baby. So I got on the phone. I was very resourceful, and I went through all these treatment programs, and I found one on the phone in the South Bronx, not a very safe place in New York, but a place that I could get to that had it required the least amount of me. And I said, I could do this. It was like 3 or 4 days a week, and then I had to go for acupuncture, and I had to go to groups. And the mandatory part of the program was attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings, which they had in this little tiny room in the basement. And guys, when I walked into that little meeting, I knew I was home. I was just home. Like I felt accepted. I didn't feel judged. I felt the love. I felt the embrace. People gave me their phone numbers, and like I belonged. Like I freaking belonged somewhere. I never felt like I even belonged in my own skin. So I started making meetings with my baby, and I'm taking her everywhere to meetings. And at meetings, women are helping me. They're holding her so I can pay attention to the message, and they're rocking her when she's anxious and she's making noise, or they're walking around the room to keep her busy so I can focus. I'm sitting in the front row of meetings, and I was nursing my daughter, and woman once said to me, "You can't sit in that front row and nurse that baby. You're going to distract all the men." And believe me, nobody could see a thing. I was very good at being discreet. And I said, you know what? Maybe someone else could sit in the back row, but I'm a newcomer and I need to sit in the front row. And I need to hear the message and I need not to be distracted by watching everyone else in the room. So I got to sit. I was like, I stood up for myself. That was big. Like I stood up for myself. Like I need to be here. And I went to a meeting in the neighborhood. Well, the women would drive me and the men back and forth to the meetings and get me back in time for the curfew. And I went to a meeting that was not far from where the shelter was, and the sign on the door said "Back to Life." It was the Back to Life group of Narcotics Anonymous, Bronx, New York, the oldest Narcotics Anonymous meeting in New York City, a beginners meeting. It was founded on April 15th, 1981. And when I saw the sign "Back to Life," I thought, "Oh my God, is it possible? This addict, this degraded, humiliated, horrible, despicable, shameful person could really come back to life." I felt like I was a walking zombie. The only time I ever smiled is when I looked at this baby, and I couldn't stop staring at her. I just could. The life that came out of me, and she came out perfect. She rated 9.9 on the Accor scale, against all odds. Like me using during all of my pregnancy, except the last 30 days. And she was my unwilling running partner in my active addiction, and she became my running partner in recovery. And we made 2 to 3 meetings a day. And at that first meeting, Back to Life, I raised my hand and I said I was new and I was scared and I didn't know how to do this and I needed help and I needed a sponsor. I didn't know what a sponsor was, but I knew I was told I needed one. And a woman came up to me after the meeting, and this was before cell phones, so she wrote her number on a piece of paper, her name, and then she wrote call me. And because she wrote call me, I felt like I need to call her. And I went back to the shelter, got in 1 minute before the curfew again, and I told them I had to call someone. They said, you can't make a phone call at 10 o'clock at night. And I took the piece of paper out and I said, look, it says call me. I have to call her. I called her that night and I asked her to respond to me. And she said, I tell you what, I'll be your temporary sponsor. Call me every day and this and that. And you know what? She temporarily sponsored me for 10.5 years in recovery until it was time for me to move on. So I don't know. I was never taught how to do anything temporarily in recovery. I was taught how to do things consistently, to go to the same meetings every week. I basically sit in the same chair. The people who know me know I sit basically in the same seat. If I try to get to the meeting early so I can get my seat, second row on the corner, on the center aisle. And if someone else is there, it's all I can do to not ask them to move. I don't ask them to move, but it's all I can do because like that's my seat. I earned that seat. There's blood on those seats. We all earned our seats here. Like if you're afraid and don't think you can do this despicable addict was able to get clean, lose the desire to use, and stick around. Last week, 2 weeks ago, I acknowledged 32 weeks in this, 32 years in this process beyond my wildest dreams. I like feel so surreal. Like, is this really my life? So I get clean and I'm taking care of the baby and I'm living in a shelter and it's very hard and they don't trust me. They don't believe I'm going to all these meetings. They're wondering where I'm going all the time and I'm going to meetings and I'm complaining about it and I'm sharing about it. And the women, two women in the rooms came up to me and offered to have me and the baby move into their homes. Like just like that. I'm a newcomer. But I knew I couldn't do that. See, I hadn't completed anything in my life for so many years. And I knew that if I didn't complete this, going through the system and the shelter system in New York City, that the city of New York would not get me housing. And I knew if I stuck it out until I was in the process back then from shelter to they had a program for those coming out of shelters who were homeless to get housing, that if I didn't do that, I would never have my own place. So I stuck it out. And when I was clean about 10 months, I got my own apartment. And it was in the South Bronx, again, not a great area, but I had looked at three other apartments and they were like, the fourth one you have to choose or, you go to the bottom of the waiting list. And it was this big apartment on a quiet block surrounded by chaos and insanity. But it was a quiet block. The building lobby was clean. The neighbors were pleasant. Um, I was the only white girl within a couple of miles in the neighborhood. It didn't matter. My parents did not teach us prejudice. I had always had friends of every single racial ethnicity and background. That didn't matter to me. The people in the South Bronx surrounded me, embraced me, took me back and forth to meetings, and loved me until I learned to love myself. So here I am now. I have an apartment, and the man of my dreams, that's my soulmate, the man I met in a bar and moved in with a week later, he was still using. And he would show up because he wanted to know his daughter. And when he was with us, he didn't use. And he was a wonderful, nurturing father. He provided for us financially, but he was still using. And I couldn't let him live with me. And I couldn't let him in the home when he was high. And it was easy to pin because he was an alcoholic. His voice, he would start slurring his speech, and I could see it all over his face. I'd have him call me before he wanted to come over. And if his voice was slurring, he didn't get in. He came to the house, and he rang the bell. I opened the chain lock. I smelled the alcohol. He didn't get in. Middle of the South Bronx, he'd come home sometimes from work 11, 12 o'clock at night. I sent him going. I knew it was dangerous. Here he is smashed, and the streets were not safe, but I had to do it. I was taught I had to worry about me. And the one time he did come and he had been using, I had smelled it on his breath after he came in, and I thought, I'm going to show him. If he can use, I can use. Because that's the thinking. That was my insane thinking. He just thinks I'm so strong, I'm going to use. And thank God I talked to a few people and I learned, like, what's the problem with that solve? I would have lost my apartment and my daughter. And for many years, as I walked around and went to meetings and did my, my daily routine, I would find myself looking up on rooftops, looking at alleyways, looking at staircases, thinking, oh, that's a good place to use. Oh, that I could use there. I could use. And I'm thinking at some point, why am I thinking that? I have an apartment. If I got high, I could use in my apartment. But the reality is, it hit me, boom. Because if I used, I was going to be homeless again in a second, and I was going to have to be using in those alleyways and doorways and rooftops. So, like, using was not an option. But all I wanted was to be a family, and I wanted Bobby to get clean. And I tried so hard. If he wanted to see the baby, I had him come and meet us at meetings. I sicked the men on him. I used to mail him NA literature at his parents' home. I did everything I could, and I found out that I had to let it go. I had to work with. I had already started working my steps, and I was taught to work a third step on it because if I let go, maybe he could hit his own bottom. Because certainly I couldn't make him hit his bottom. And when I finally did let go, he hit his own bottom. He asked me to help him get into detox, and he went into detox almost 29 years ago, and he hasn't looked back since. So we're a recovering family. My story is like beyond my. It's like a storybook. It's a fairy tale. Like I met a man in a bar. We fell in love. We had a baby. I got clean. He got clean. Guess what? 35 years from the day we met. Last week was 35 years. I'm still in love with him. He still makes me laugh. My skin still tingles when he touches my neck or gives me a kiss. And God, I mean, who has it better than me? Like I went back to school. I got a master's degree. We bought a home. You know, we have a tenant's apartment, which my daughter, her fiance, and my two grandchildren now live in right below us. We have a little backyard, which is our safe space that we can bring the kids to play because we can't bring them anywhere else in New York right now. And I got a job when I was 3 years clean based on being a recovering addict because it was a substance abuse counselor position in a methadone program. And somebody heard me share at a meeting and was talking to me, and the words came out of my mouth. They tell me where they worked, and the words came out of my mouth like, "Are there any jobs available?" And I didn't even want a job. I wanted to hang out. I wanted to go to the beach. I wanted to take the baby with me and play. She was 3, and I thought I didn't have to carry her anymore. No more baby bag, no more diapers. But the words came out of my mouth, and like I didn't say them. Someone else put those words in my mouth. I got that first job, and I went back to school. I got the master's degree. I got recruited by two other. I got recruited by my current job. I'm here now almost 19 years in a position of authority where I can actually make a difference in women's lives. I run programs for women who are HIV positive and women who are at risk and affected. I I fall short every day in my program, but I have people in my life. I've surrounded myself with people like Mary, like Francis, like my husband, like my friends, my support group, my sponsor, who are going to tell me when I fall short. Like I always say, the women I want in my life as friends are the woman who's going to tell me if I have lipstick on my teeth. I think every woman here knows what I'm talking about. Like, I want you to call me on my stuff. Don't co-sign me when I do the wrong thing, when I hurt someone's feeling, when I speak without thinking, when I do something self-centered, when I take advantage of a situation. I'm guilty of doing that stuff. But I've worked my steps a few times. I'm back on the 10th step again. I changed sponsors twice in recovery. So I had my first sponsor for 10 years, another sponsor for 16 years, and I'm currently with my current sponsor. I think it's about 3 or 4 years now. I got a new passion for working the steps. When I changed sponsors the last time, I was stuck. I was still making meetings. I was still talking about what I was going through. I was still working, I wasn't working steps. I was sponsoring, I was giving service, but I wasn't taking care of me on the inside, right? Because it's an inside job. And when I got this new spot, and I got a new sponsor only because my old sponsor told me, you know what, you're not using me, you're not working your steps, you need to move on. And I felt like that first boyfriend who broke up with me when I was 13 years old. And it was that hurt. But I went home and made a phone call. And this one woman I always had in my mind that if I needed a new sponsor, she's the one who I admired the way she carried herself, that she conducted herself like a lady. I wanted to conduct myself the way she did. And I trusted her, and I knew her my entire recovery. And she said, "I'd love to sponsor you. I'm honored, but let me call my sponsor. Can I call you tomorrow morning at 8 in the morning?" And my phone rang at 8 o'clock the next morning. So I've been really blessed. I have a lot of fun in recovery. I go to Narcotics Anonymous campouts when there's no COVID-19. I go to conventions. I travel. 2.5 years ago, one of my best friends, Laura Kay from Boca Raton, Florida, called me. I was in the car. I just want to tell the story, and then I want to shut up. And she said, I got asked to speak at a convention in Denmark. She goes, I have a hotel room you can share. Would you like to come? And I'm not an impulsive person. Everything I do is planned out. I'm an overpacker, over planner. And I said, yes, yes, I'd love to. And I'm like, oh my God. I hung up the phone. I said, Bobby, I just told Laura I'd go to Denmark. He said, great. I said, you want to come? He goes, Denmark in March? I don't think so. It was cold. So we did. We went to Italy, and then we came to Denmark. There were three of us, me and Laura, and our friend Peter, who speaks Italian. And when we got off the plane, there was 3 or 4 recovering addicts standing at the gate with their hands up like this to welcome us to Denmark, Narcotics Anonymous, Denmark. And they came with 2 cars because I told them I'm an overpacker and we were traveling for 2 weeks, so they knew. So they piled our stuff in the 2 cars. They brought us to the hotel. We went out to eat. By the time we had finished that first meal, I felt like I had all these new friends. The next day, you guys know who you are. They took us touring around Denmark, showing us the sights, showing us what they loved about their city and their country. And I met some amazing people. When we got to the convention, there was a man standing outside the door welcoming everybody and hugging everybody. And he barely spoke a few words of English, but he was there. I don't know if he's on this meeting today. His name was, I'm going to break his anonymity. His name was Babak, and he barely spoke English, but he was determined to make anyone who came to that convention feel welcome. And he had his interpreter, Ronnie, who's here today, who just reached out and loved us. And we never felt more welcoming and more love in our lives. Narcotics Anonymous has given me, like I said, a life beyond my wildest dreams. I could never repay it enough or thank the fellowship or the people in it for what you've done for me. Thank you for letting me share.